SpaceX just confirmed everything about Flight 13, and the details make no sense at first. This is a company that built its entire empire on never throwing rockets away. On this flight, it's throwing the whole thing away on purpose. It's also spending 20 brand new satellites it has no intention of keeping. And before this rocket ever leaves the ground, SpaceX painted part of its heat shield to look broken. None of that is a mistake. Every one of those choices is deliberate, and once you see what SpaceX is actually hunting for on this flight, the whole thing snaps into focus. Start with the rocket it's willing to lose. Flight 13 targets July 16th from Pad 2 at Starbase, flying the newest V3 version of Starship and Super Heavy. Neither stage is coming back to the tower. The booster will fire a landing burnout over the Gulf and sink. The ship is aimed at a controlled splashdown in the Indian Ocean, and the 20 satellites eventually follow them down. Here's why SpaceX would do that. It deliberately took recovery off the table for this mission. With nothing to bring home, the team can push the new vehicle harder, rehearse the landing burn safely over open water, and gather data without ever putting the launch tower at risk. Throwing the rocket away buys information, and SpaceX needs information far more than it needs this particular hardware. But that only explains the first strange decision. It says nothing about why SpaceX is sacrificing 20 brand new satellites along with it. So let's back up to why this flight exists at all. Flight 12 broke in 3 specific places, and SpaceX says it knows exactly what went wrong. Flight 13 is where we find out whether it actually fixed anything. Here's the first break. After the booster let go of the ship, it was supposed to flip around and point back toward home. Instead, it ended up about 90 degrees off. The cause was surprisingly subtle. The ship's engines lit at slightly different moments than expected, and that timing wobble was enough to throw the giant booster off its turn. SpaceX rewrote the startup sequence so it can shrug off that kind of timing difference. The second break was worse. To fly back, the booster has to relight a group of engines. On Flight 12, 5 of its 33 engines had trouble lighting, and the burn cut out early. So SpaceX changed hardware to make relighting more reliable and rewrote the alarm rules that decide when an engine is in trouble, because those rules were tuned for a much cleaner situation than dozens of engines roaring at once. The third break happened on the ship. About 40 seconds after separation, Starship lost one of its 3 vacuum engines. It kept flying and still hit its target path, which proves it can survive an engine failure. The problem is that engines should not be dropping out at all. SpaceX says the causes were tangled together, and it has changed both hardware and procedures to deal with them. Now look at what those 3 problems have in common. Every one of them is about engines lighting when they should, staying lit, and behaving predictably. That is the whole ballgame for a reusable rocket. A rocket that flies once only has to work once. A rocket that comes home, gets checked, and flies again has to be boringly dependable every single time. And here's the uncomfortable part. SpaceX has rewritten the startup logic, changed the relight hardware, and rebuilt the engine protection rules. All of that is still just software and metal sitting on the ground. Flight 13 is where those fixes finally meet 33 engines behaving imperfectly in the real world. But fixing the engines only explains why Flight 13 has to fly. It still doesn't explain the satellites. Flight 13 carries 20 Starlink V3 satellites, the next generation, built to push far more capacity into the network. This is the first real test of releasing them from Starship. They'll pop out between about 16 and 27 minutes into the flight, unfold their panels and antennas, then try to reach a ground station in South Africa and beam laser links to the rest of the fleet. Here's the catch. These satellites never reach a lasting orbit. They ride the same up and over path as Starship, so they come down with it. SpaceX is spending 20 brand new spacecraft purely to prove the release system works, which answers the second mystery. They were always meant to be disposable, and 6 of them carry cameras aimed back at Starship itself. As they drift away from the ship, those 6 satellites photograph and scan its heat shield, then send the pictures home. SpaceX is trying to build a way to inspect its own rocket in mid-flight, which is where the fake damage finally makes sense. SpaceX painted selected heat tiles white to imitate missing ones, giving the cameras a known target to find. The logic is brutal and simple. If those cameras can't reliably spot damage SpaceX put there on purpose, they can never be trusted to spot real damage later. The rest of the shield is a science experiment too, and each piece of it asks a different question. Can tiles hold on in the hardest places to protect? To find out, SpaceX stuck them onto the bare metal flaps and around the base of the ship. How much force is actually trying to tear them off? Some tiles have sensors buried inside them to measure exactly that. And SpaceX is deliberately flying harder through the thick lower atmosphere on the way up, accepting more punishment on those tiles in exchange for lifting more weight. All of it points at the same goal. The heat shield remains one of the hardest unsolved problems in the entire Starship program because coming home means slamming into the atmosphere while thousands of ceramic tiles take heat that would vaporize bare steel. One day, SpaceX wants to look at a returning ship, judge whether its shield is intact, and decide with confidence whether to bring it back over land to the tower. But spotting damage is only half of coming home. A ship returning from a real orbit also has to start the trip. About 39 minutes into the flight, SpaceX plans to relight a single Raptor while Starship coasts through space. An engine that can restart out there is what lets a ship change its path, and more importantly, drop itself out of orbit on command. Without it, Starship can reach space and stay stuck there. So now the whole mission snaps into focus. Can this new V3 Starship fly its full mission, inspect itself, and repeat what it did last time, cleanly enough to be trusted with something much bigger? Because something bigger is exactly what comes next. And this is where Flight 13 quietly becomes a test of whether Flight 14 stays the orbital mission. The plan after this is to reach orbit and eventually bring a ship home from orbital speed, and that plan only survives if this flight goes well. Here's what passing looks like. The booster flips correctly and completes its return burn. The satellites deploy on schedule. The cameras find the fake damage SpaceX planted for them. The Raptor relights in space. Hit those, and the next flight can keep aiming for orbit. Miss them, and Flight 14 turns into another repair mission instead. That is the gate Flight 13 has to walk through. So what are you watching for on Flight 13? The booster finally flipping and burning the way it should, or 6 satellites turning around to photograph a heat shield that SpaceX damaged on purpose? Drop your take in the comments and tell me where you land.